Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Gript. You may have heard that Turkey has begun bombing Kurdish positions in northern Syria after Donald Trump withdrew his support from the militants in their fight against ISIS. Joining us now to discuss the matter is Mimi Al-Laham, also known as Syrian Girl, who has spent some 8 years commenting on the war in her home country. So, Mimi, can you tell us what exactly is happening in northern Syria and why Donald Trump removed troops?
Basically, the US had an agenda to carve out or federalize or balkanize Syria and create this Kurdish region. And that flies in the face of their ally Turkey because Turkey fears that its own Kurdish population will, more specifically, the terrorist group, the PKK, would start an insurrection in Turkey because they've been empowered by the United States. And Trump recently, just yesterday or just a few hours ago, admitted that the US was working with and arming the PKK, which even the US designates a terrorist organization. The PKK is a Kurdish separatist group. Now, the Turkey doesn't want the US to create a Kurdistan, but the US wants to create a Kurdistan, and then there's been this conflict. And Turkey wanted to go into Syria to attack the PKK, which the US has been supporting. And I guess Erdogan told Trump, like, they're going in no matter what. And if US troops are in the way, then they're going to get injured. And so Trump is kind of in a between a rock and a hard place. He has to pull the troops out because he can't go in direct conflict with his ally NATO. Turkey is part of NATO.
But could he
Of
not
course,
just have stood by the Kurds and exercised the military power or threatened to exercise it against Turkey if they had attacked the Kurds?
well, he can't exercise military power against a NATO ally. Not only that, but it's one of the largest, has one of the largest armies in NATO, and also has many US bases inside Turkey. And not only that, but if Turkey so chooses, it can cut off US soldiers from water and food very easily, and the US would have no means by which to resupply.
So
So they're
are the Kurds going to be wiped out in your estimation?
well, the thing is that it depends on whether or not they choose to ally themselves with the Syrian army. Because if they can do that, then the Syrian army will go east of the Euphrates and defend Syria's borders. Because let's forget, the Kurds are just a very small minority in Syria. And the land that they want to control is not just made up of Kurds. In fact, it's not even majority Kurdish. Kurds are a plurality, which means they're the highest percentage of the minorities. They're 40%, but all the other minorities combined come up to 60%, which includes Arabs, Turkmens, Assyrians. So there was no conceivable way in which they would ever really have created their own state. There's no way that Syria could have been federalized in that way. I think the US basically it was a pipe dream because they wanted to control Syria's oil fields, which happens to be east of the Euphrates. So the only chance or hope that the Kurds have, or at least not the Kurds, but the SDF and the YPG, which are Kurdish militias, and the unfortunate people that live under their rule, which have found themselves now between a US and Turkish invasion and occupation, the only hope that these people have is the Syrian army. Because once the Syrian army goes in, the risk of creating this Kurdistan will be placated and Turkey will have no reason to invade.
So you think
The
Turkey will pull back if the Syrian army meets it there in northern Syria?
Yes, yes, because the whole reason that Turkey is attacking in the first place is because the US is trying to create a Kurdistan and is occupying Syria. So, in a sense, the presence of the United States is causing this Turkish invasion. And let's not forget, I mean, there's a lot of hysteria in the media about this now, but there wasn't as much hysteria about it when Turkey was invading Idlib province, Afrin, and Manbij. In fact, the French and the British joined forces with Turkey in Manbij, and they certainly support Turkey in Idlib, even though the fighters, the rebels in Idlib are Al-Qaeda. So there's a little bit of a sort of hypocritical hysteria going on here, because at the end of the day, it's not really about the Kurds or fear for the Kurds. The Americans don't care at all what happens to the Kurds west of the Euphrates. They care about the east of the Euphrates because there's oil there, and they want to prevent Syria from getting to its own oil. That's why they've sanctioned Syria.
Do you expect that the Syrian government will protect the Kurds if they go in there? And is there any tension there at the moment between the two?
There has not been, the Syrian army has not attacked the SDF, the Kurdish militias, YPG, whatever acronym they are using right now. But that's because they know that at the end of the day, they're going to have to join forces to get Turkey out. And if the Kurds learn their lesson from what happened in Afrin, where the Syrian government requested that they allow the Syrian military to go in and defend that border, what ended up happening is that the Kurds refused because they wanted to, they still had this demand that Syria federalize, which is something that's never going to happen. And because of their refusal, Turkey ended up occupying more of Syria's territory. So long as they accept this reality and allow the Syrian military to go in and defend its own territory from the Turkish invasion, of course, Syria has no intention of going after them. Syria has its hands full with many other militaries, and of course, they would protect the Kurds and every other minority, including the Assyrian Christians, and the Turkmens, and the Arabs in the region, because they're all Syrian. They're all Syrian at the end of the day.
And Turkey has no ambition to control anywhere in northern Syria in the long term.
Well, we don't know. Of course, historically, Turkey occupies or stole a region of Syria called Iskandaronia or Antakya, and this was post World War One, and that was before the sovereignty of these nations were kind of legally set in stone in the United Nations. And that was the coastal region just above Idlib province that they took. So there may be that in their minds, but by international law, that would be very difficult for them to do. And at the end of the day, the Syrian military had no qualms going into Idlib, even though there was Turkish soldiers there, and they will not have any qualms going east of the Euphrates to meet the Turks either.
And from a Kurdish point of view, is this a massive betrayal ultimately by Donald Trump?
I mean, I'm sure they see it that way, but I think it's kind of funny because at the end of the day, it is they that betrayed their own country. I mean, if these Kurds are Syrian citizens, then what kind of a citizen what kind of a betrayal is it to work with an illegal occupation that is bombing your country? I mean, it's like the pot calling the kettle black, or no honor amongst thieves. Of course, someone who betrays people is going to be betrayed. And they say, they have no friends but the mountains, but there are no mountains in the northeast of Syria. And I suppose, if you have no friends but the mountains, the question comes up, maybe you make alliances and break them too easily. Because let's not forget, the Kurds allied themselves with Russia, with the Free Syrian Army at the start of the war. Previously, before the war began, they were allied with the Syrian military. And then in the end, they thought that they would get the most out of the US, and they were getting support from all sides, but perhaps they juggled too many balls, and the balls all fell down. And, that's politics. So I don't see how it could be a betrayal, because at the end of the day, what does the US owe the Kurds? Nothing. The US supposedly fought ISIS in northeast Syria, so that is Syrian land. So shouldn't it be the Kurds that owe the US because the US helped them fight ISIS on their own territory?
And so is the war ultimately drawing to an end in your view?
I think it's the beginning of the end, because strategically, if you look at it from like a chessboard, for example, every move that the US makes is a loss. And it just depends on how much they're going to lose. If they don't pull out from Syria, or if they try to, 10 months ago, Trump tried to do this pull out and got a lot of pushback because they said, oh, Turkey's going to attack, etc., etc. 10 months down the line, they're still facing the exact same situation and nothing had changed. The only thing that had changed was Turkey was getting more and more agitated. They had hoped to pressure the Syrian government into accepting a constitution that would federalize Syria and therefore legitimize their illegal occupation and their illegal military bases. But that was never going to happen. Syrian people, the vast majority, 90% at least, are not Kurdish. So of course they're not going to vote for a constitution that's going to federalize their country. It's impossible. So I think after 10 months and nothing's changed, I think a week ago you may have heard that Syria created the Constitutional Committee in the United Nations, and the Kurdish factions were complaining that they were not part of the Constitutional Committee. And then you heard Pompeo making threats because apparently he remembered that in May, some chlorine was used to attack some Al-Qaeda, according to him. I guess they've given up on trying to prove that it's sarin. They're just going with chlorine now. They basically were threatening the Syrian government in the hopes of changing their mind about the constitution. But there's no way that their position is untenable, and therefore, either they pull out now and save whatever shred of an alliance they have with Turkey, or eventually they have to pull out anyway, but Turkey's going to be even more upset.
And there is one other area of the country apart from the northeast, and that is Idlib, that's still occupied by many, many rebels. How do you see that resolving itself, or will it ever resolve itself?
Well, I see the fact that the only way forward is for the Syrian military to go in. Al-Qaeda controls Idlib. Brett McGurk, the former counterterrorism envoy for the United States, said quite clearly that Al-Qaeda controls Idlib. So, in what way can Syria allow Al-Qaeda to control that much of its own land? It's impossible. Of course, you might start to hear admissions that Al-Qaeda is in Idlib, and perhaps even starting to be in other parts of Syria that Turkey is going to go in by the Western media, because now they want to get at Turkey. They would like to hurt Turkey politically and in the media. So you might get these kind of admissions about the rebel groups. So the only solution for Syria is to regain all of its territory militarily.
And so thankfully the war does appear to be drawn to a close. And you've been covering this now for some 8 years, I think. Has it been obviously a long road for you, but for the people of Syria, it must just have taken the most awful toll in a humanitarian sense, not least?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you hear a lot about the refugees going to Europe. You hear about 4 million in Turkey, and 2 million in Lebanon, etc. But as a matter of fact, the majority of refugees were internally displaced, 7 million. So half the population lost their homes. Countless dead, of course. It's been, very bad for the economy. There's fuel shortages. The U.S. has put sanctions on Syria that prevented life-saving medication like anti-cancer drugs from reaching children with leukemia. Of course, it's been devastating for Syrians, and I have done everything I can just to bring attention to what I see. It's so blatantly clear, and yet the rhetoric of the neocons is trying to suppress this truth.
And so ultimately, has the balance of power shifted in your eyes in the Middle East, whereby maybe that Saudi alliance that built up has been weakened by not being able to overthrow the Syrian government, and Shia governments coming to each other's support?
I think that they thought that Syria would fall very, very quickly. I think Turkey counted on that as well. And they didn't realize how this would end. So yeah, I think Turkey and Saudi Arabia are now even in conflict with each other over Syria, and they have lost almost politically and strategically more than Syria has potentially, in spite of the economic and humanitarian loss that Syria has suffered. Strategically and militarily, it's going to end up winning more than Saudi Arabia and the others.
Mimi Al Laham, thank you so much for your time.